As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the bustling airport, an elderly man named Thomas Reynolds shuffled toward the boarding gate. His cane tapped softly on the polished floor, echoing the memories of a life well lived. Clad in a faded military jacket, the patches told stories of bravery and service that had long since settled into his bones. White wisps of hair framed his wrinkled face, and though his eyes were weary, they sparkled with a quiet pride. Today, he was heading to Seattle for a ceremony honoring his old military unit. Thomas had never been one for fanfare. He preferred the company of memories over crowds. Yet, he felt it was important to attend. After all, few of his comrades were still around to share in the moment. As he approached the gate, he handed his boarding pass to a young woman named Lily, whose name tag glimmered under the fluorescent lights. Her smile faltered for a brief moment before she plastered it back on. "Sir," she said, her voice polite but firm, "this ticket is not valid for this flight." Thomas furrowed his brows, confusion washing over him. "That can't be right. I bought it a month ago." Lily scanned the pass again, impatience creeping into her demeanor. "I'm sorry, but we've assigned that seat to another passenger. You'll have to wait here while we sort this out." With a sigh, Thomas stepped aside, allowing the rush of travelers to pass him by. Behind him, a man in his mid-30s leaned against a nearby pillar, observing the interaction. Dressed in a simple black hoodie and jeans, Jake Mitchell blended in with the crowd, but he was much more than a mere passenger. He was the owner of Skyward Airlines. Jake often preferred to fly under the radar, taking the opportunity to see how his staff treated passengers. As he watched Lily's dismissive tone, a tightening knot formed in his stomach. He could overhear snippets of their conversation. "It's overbooked, and he'll probably cause a scene." Something felt deeply wrong. Minutes ticked by as Thomas stood patiently, the cane trembling slightly in his grip. Other passengers boarded, some casting sympathetic glances his way, while others hurried past, oblivious to his plight. Finally, Lily returned, her expression sour. "We've managed to find a seat for you, sir, but it's in the last row next to the restroom." Thomas's shoulders slumped slightly, but he nodded. "That'll do." Jake, however, couldn't let this go. He stepped forward, his voice calm yet authoritative. "Excuse me, what seems to be the problem here?" Lily looked startled, her professional mask slipping for just a moment. "Oh, no problem. We're just assisting this passenger," she replied, but Jake raised an eyebrow. "Assisting him by denying his seat?" he asked, his tone sharp. Thomas glanced at Jake, surprised by the stranger's intervention. "It's all right, son. I'll figure it out." Ignoring Thomas's attempt to downplay the situation, Jake pressed on. "He has a valid ticket, doesn't he?" Lily hesitated. "Yes, but..." "Then he should be allowed to board." "Overbooking is the airline's mistake, not his," Jake insisted. Lily flushed, and with a quick turn, she hurried away to confer with another employee. Turning to Thomas, Jake offered a small smile. "I'm Jake. Mind if I stick around to make sure they don't give you the runaround?" Thomas chuckled softly. "Suit yourself. I appreciate it." As they waited, Jake learned that Thomas had served during the Vietnam War, a time that had shaped him in ways words could scarcely express. The old man spoke humbly, glossing over the details of his service, but Jake could sense the weight of his experiences. Eventually, Lily returned, her demeanor still sour. "We can offer you a seat in the last row," she said again, but Jake wasn't satisfied. "That's unacceptable," he said firmly. He paid for a specific seat. Lily's smile turned forced. "It's the best we can do." Jake felt a surge of determination. He wanted to reveal his identity, to call out Lily's behavior, but something held him back. He needed to see how this played out. As Thomas made his way toward the plane, Jake followed closely. The moment felt crucial. Just as Thomas stumbled slightly, dropping his duffel bag, Jake noticed a glint of metal spill out, a polished but clearly old metal. His heart raced as he bent down to help. When he picked up the metal, Jake's breath caught. The inscription was unmistakable. He had seen it before in his grandfather's old photo albums. Could this quiet veteran be the same Thomas Reynolds his grandfather had spoken of? "Are you all right?" Jake asked, handing the metal back, his mind swirling with questions. Thomas looked up, his eyes suddenly alert. "I'm fine, just a bit clumsy." Jake's mind raced. His grandfather, a veteran himself, had often shared tales of bravery, and one name had come up more than most: Thomas Reynolds, the soldier who had saved his life. As they took their seats, Jake pretended to check his phone, but his thoughts were consumed by the man next to him. The flight attendants began their pre-flight checks, and as the plane leveled out, Jake took a deep breath. He needed to know more. "Mind if I sit here for a bit?" Jake asked, gesturing to the empty seat beside Thomas. "Sure, as long as you don't mind the smell back here," Thomas joked, a hint of warmth in his voice. Jake sat down, excited yet nervous. "That's an impressive medal you've got there. Distinguished Service Cross, right?" Thomas's eyes flickered with surprise. "Not many recognize that these days." "My grandfather had one," Jake replied, keeping the conversation casual. "He used to tell me stories about the men he served with. Said they were the real heroes." "Your grandfather must have been one of them," Thomas said with a knowing smile. Jake hesitated. "He talked a lot about someone named Thomas Reynolds. He said he wouldn't be alive if it weren't for you." The old man's expression changed, a mix of pride and sadness washing over his features. "Your grandfather was a good man. A brave soldier." Jake pressed on, sensing the weight of history. "But why didn't he ever tell me what you did?" Thomas chuckled softly, though there was no humor in it. Men like him didn't dwell on the past. They didn't want their families to carry the burden. Their conversation was interrupted by a flight attendant. "Sir, you need to return to your seat," she said to Jake. "I'm fine here, thanks," he replied, meeting her gaze evenly. "It's against policy to block the aisle," she insisted. Thomas cleared his throat. "It's all right, son. Don't cause trouble on my account." Jake stood, frustration boiling beneath the surface. "I'll be back," he said quietly to Thomas. As he returned to his seat, determination surged within him. This man was a hero, yet he was being treated like an inconvenience. Jake knew he had to take action. Once the plane landed, Jake approached Thomas again. "Can I buy you a cup of coffee? There's something I want to discuss." Thomas raised an eyebrow but nodded. "All right, son. I suppose I've got time." At a small cafe near the baggage claim, Jake ordered coffee and brought it back to the table. For a moment, neither spoke. Thomas stirred his coffee, lost in thought. "I meant what I said on the plane," Jake began. "I want to hear more about your story." Thomas glanced up, his expression unreadable. "Your grandfather was a good man. He didn't need to make a fuss about me. But you saved his life, didn't you?" Jake pressed. Thomas sighed, his voice dropping. "We saved each other. That's how it works in war. You don't think about yourself, you think about the man next to you." Jake listened intently, but he sensed there was more. There must be a day that stands out, a moment that changed everything. Thomas's gaze grew distant. "Yes, there was a day. It was the worst day of my life." Jake remained silent, allowing Thomas the space to share. "It was early 1971, Thomas began, his voice heavy with memory. We were deep in enemy territory, cut off from reinforcements. Morale was low. Our unit had been tasked with holding a critical position, an impossible mission." Jake leaned in, captivated. "What happened?" We stumbled into an ambush, Thomas continued, his hands trembling slightly. Fire came from every direction. Half our squad fell in minutes. Richard was hit, pinned down, and I had a choice, leave him behind or risk everything to save him. I didn't think. I just acted. Jake felt a lump form in his throat. And you made it back? Yes, but that was just the beginning. The real fight came when they launched an all-out assault. We were outnumbered 10-1. I took command when our lieutenant fell. We held the line for hours until reinforcements arrived. That's incredible, Jake said, his admiration growing. But you carry the weight of that day with you, don't you? Every day, Thomas replied, his voice thick with emotion. The men we lost, the things we saw, medals don't erase that. Jake nodded, understanding the weight of unspoken stories. I think my grandfather understood that. He always said the bravest men carry the heaviest burdens. Their conversation deepened, the bond between them strengthening with every word. Jake realized that Thomas's story was not just his own, it was a reflection of the countless veterans who had sacrificed so much. As they finished their coffee, Jake felt a sense of responsibility wash over him. I own Skyward Airlines, he said finally. And I want to make things right. You deserve better than what happened at the gate. Thomas looked surprised, but he waved a hand dismissively. You don't need to apologize for them. No, Jake insisted. I do. Your treatment was unacceptable. I'm going to change how we honor veterans. Thomas studied Jake for a long moment before nodding. Your grandfather would be proud. In the weeks that followed, Jake launched the Honor Flight Initiative, a program dedicated to ensuring veterans received the respect they deserved. Priority boarding, complimentary upgrades, and personalized recognition became the new standard. As the initiative gained traction, Jake invited Thomas back to the airport for a special meeting, eager for him to share his story with the staff. When Thomas walked into the conference room, he was met with a warm welcome. He spoke about the camaraderie of his unit, the sacrifices made, and the pride he felt for his country. By the end of his speech, eyes were misty, and hearts were full. Afterward, as they stood together, Thomas turned to Jake. You didn't have to do all this. I did, Jake replied firmly. It's about making sure no veteran feels overlooked again. Months later, the airline unveiled a new plane dedicated to Thomas and the brave men and women who served. As the cover was removed, revealing a beautiful mural of a soldier saluting against the backdrop of an American flag, Thomas was visibly moved. This plane is dedicated to you, Jake said, his voice thick with emotion. Every time it takes off, it carries your legacy with it. Tears glistened in Thomas's eyes as he took in the moment. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Jake replied. This is for you and every veteran who has ever served. As the inaugural flight took off, Thomas looked out the window, the sight of his name on the tail bringing a rare smile to his face. For the first time in a long time, he felt truly seen, not just as a veteran, but as a person whose life had made a difference. Jake turned to his staff, feeling a surge of pride. This was just the beginning, he thought. With every flight, they would honor the stories of those who served, ensuring that every life had a legacy worth celebrating.